The moment my daughter brought a realtor to my 68th birthday dinner, I realized the cake on the table wasn't the reason my family had gathered.
As you can
Emily
see in Section
smiled
3 of the
as if
portfolio, the
everything
current
was
offer
normal.
is very competitive.
Her
We
husband
recommend
sat
moving
beside
forward
her
soon.
with a
I
folder in
understand.
his lap,
I'm just not sure if
and a
Mom is
woman
entirely
I had
comfortable
never
with the
met
terms.
was studying the walls of the home my late husband and I had spent 35 years paying for. "We only want what's best for you, Mom,"
Thank you all for coming.
my daughter said.
Now, if you
Then the
please, I'll
realtor
take the
mentioned
original
selling my
deed
house.
copy.
I looked around my own dining room at the people I loved most and quietly asked one question. "May I see the deed copy?" The silence that followed was louder than anything I had heard since my husband died. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touches you in any way, please like and subscribe so we can continue these conversations together. And please leave a comment telling me what you would have done if your own family had surprised you this way. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Sometimes it helps to remember that none of us are truly alone. I have always believed that a house remembers the people who love it. On the morning of my 68th birthday, I woke up before sunrise, just as I had for most of my adult life. The old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6 times, and for a few seconds, I forgot that Robert had been gone for nearly 4 years. Every birthday for 35 years had begun with the same ritual. Robert would make coffee. I would pretend to stay asleep. He would walk into our bedroom carrying a tray with burnt toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee that was always too strong. Then he would kiss my forehead and say, "Happy birthday, Angie. Another year, and you're still the prettiest woman in Ohio." Even now, I could still hear his voice. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty space beside me. The silence in a house after losing someone never truly leaves. You simply learn how to walk around it. That morning, I told myself I would not cry. Emily was coming. Jason was coming. Noah and Lily were coming. My family would fill the house again. I got dressed slowly, choosing the blue sweater Robert had bought me on our 40th anniversary. He always said blue made my eyes look younger. Outside, the October air was cool. The maple tree in the front yard had turned brilliant shades of red and orange. Robert planted that tree when Emily was 8 years old. It had grown alongside our daughter. At least, that was how I used to think. I spent most of the morning cooking. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh dinner rolls, and of course, the chocolate cake Emily had always loved as a child. I no longer had the energy to cook large meals very often, but birthdays were different. Birthdays meant family. As I kneaded the dough for the rolls, I remembered another birthday nearly 20 years earlier. Emily had come home from college unexpectedly. She ran into the kitchen, hugged me tightly, and said, "Mom, no matter where life takes me, this house will always be home." I remembered crying after she left that weekend because I was so proud of the woman she was becoming. Back then, I could never have imagined feeling nervous about my own daughter coming to dinner. Yet that morning I did. The feeling sat quietly inside my chest. Not fear, exactly. Just uneasiness. Over the past year, Emily had become harder to reach. Our phone calls grew shorter. Visits became less frequent. When we did talk, the conversations somehow always drifted toward money. Property taxes, retirement, the housing market, the value of my neighborhood. At first, I thought she was simply concerned about me living alone. Many daughters worry about their aging mothers. But lately, something had changed. There was a distance in her voice, a calculation, as if she were studying my life instead of sharing it. Around noon, Noah called. "Happy birthday, Grandma." His voice instantly made me smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. Dad says we're coming around 5. Wonderful." He hesitated. "Grandma?" "Yes, are you okay?" The question surprised me. "I'm fine." Another pause. Okay. I love you. I love you too. After we hung up, I found myself standing in the kitchen holding the phone. Why had he asked that Noah was 17 now? Quiet, thoughtful, much more like Robert than Jason. Children often notice tension before adults admit it exists. By 4 o'clock, the house smelled of cinnamon roast beef and fresh bread. I lit 2 candles beside Robert's photograph in the living room. The picture showed him standing on the front porch with a hammer in his hand. During the summer, we built the deck ourselves. He looked proud, tired, happy. "You'd better be watching over me tonight," I whispered. At exactly 5:15, Emily's SUV pulled into the driveway. I smiled automatically and walked to the front door. The grandchildren climbed out first. Lily ran toward me. "Happy birthday, Grandma!" She wrapped her arms around my waist. For a moment, everything felt normal. Noah hugged me next. His hug lasted longer than usual. When he stepped back, I noticed him looking toward his parents. Emily finally approached. She kissed my cheek. "Happy birthday, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart." But something felt different. Her hug was brief. "Careful." Jason shook my hand instead of embracing me. "Looking good, Angela." Nobody had called me Angela except people outside the family. Robert called me Angie. Emily called me Mom. Jason usually hugged me. I told myself not to read too much into it. People have bad days. Families go through phases. Still, the uneasiness returned. Inside the house, the grandchildren wandered toward the kitchen. Emily remained near the doorway. Jason stood beside her. Neither moved very far, as if they were waiting for something. I noticed Emily glance toward the driveway. Then she checked her watch. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Of course." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. During dinner preparation, Lily helped set the table. Noah quietly carried dishes from the kitchen. Emily sat at the dining room table looking at her phone. Jason walked through the house several times. The living room, the hallway, the back patio, the staircase. I watched him pause beside the window. He seemed to be studying the property. "Beautiful backyard," he said. "It always has been." "How big is the lot again?" "Almost an acre." He nodded. "Nice." The conversation died. At 6 o'clock, everyone sat down. The candles flickered. The food steamed. Robert's empty chair sat at the end of the table. No one mentioned it. No one ever did. I tried to keep the evening cheerful. I asked Lily about school. I asked Noah about college applications. Emily answered with short sentences. Jason kept checking his phone. The silence between conversations grew longer. Several times I caught Emily exchanging glances with her husband. Noah noticed too. He stared down at his plate. Lily seemed confused. Finally, I said gently, "Is something wrong?" Emily looked at Jason. Jason looked toward the front door. Then Emily forced a smile. "No, Mom, everything's fine." But at that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Jason immediately stood up. "I'll get it." I remember looking toward the hallway. I remember feeling cold, even though the oven was still warm behind me. And for reasons I still cannot explain, I looked at Robert's photograph sitting on the side table. The candle beside it flickered. Jason opened the front door. A woman's voice drifted inside. "Thank you so much for inviting me." Emily took a deep breath. Noah lowered his eyes. And that was the moment I realized my birthday dinner was about to become something entirely different. The woman standing in my doorway looked to be around 50. She wore a beige coat, carried a leather portfolio, and smiled with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to entering strangers' homes. "Karen Mitchell," she said warmly. "Thank you for inviting me." I looked at her. Then I looked at my daughter, and finally, at Jason. No one spoke. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of Robert's grandfather clock. Emily finally forced a smile. Mom, Karen is a friend. Karen quickly nodded. Yes, we actually met through Jason. I glanced at Jason. He avoided my eyes. Please, Emily said. Come sit down. Karen took the empty chair beside Jason, the chair directly across from Robert's photograph. My stomach tightened. This was my birthday dinner. My grandchildren were sitting at the table. The candles were still burning beside the cake, and suddenly a stranger was joining us. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had warned me. I sat down slowly. Noah stared at his plate. Lily looked confused. Who is Karen? Lily finally asked. Emily answered quickly. She helps families make important decisions. Karen smiled again. I work in real estate. The room became very quiet. I remember feeling almost embarrassed. Not because of Karen, but because everyone else already seemed to know why she was there except me. Jason picked up his glass. To Angela. Everyone raised their glasses. To Mom. To Grandma. I smiled politely. But something inside me had already begun to change. We ate for several minutes. The conversation felt unnatural. Emily talked about traffic. Jason discussed interest rates. Karen complimented the neighborhood. Noah barely touched his food. Several times I noticed him looking at me, as if he wanted to say something. Finally, Karen spoke. This is really a beautiful home. I nodded. Thank you. How long have you lived here? 35 years? Wow. She looked around the dining room. The market in this area has become extremely strong. Jason immediately joined in. Houses around here are selling very fast. I looked at him. Are they very fast? He repeated. Emily folded her napkin. Mom, your house has probably doubled in value. I felt my heartbeat change. The conversation was no longer accidental. It had direction. Karen continued. Properties like this are very desirable right now. I placed my fork down. I see, Emily smiled nervously. We just thought it would be good to talk. Talk about what Jason leaned back. Well, your future. I looked at my daughter. My future. She nodded. You live alone now. I do. The house is large, yes. Emily smiled nervously. We just thought it would be good to talk. Talk about what Jason leaned back. Well, your future. I looked at my daughter. My future. She nodded. You live alone now. I do. The house is large. Yes, you have stairs. I've had stairs for 35 years. Nobody laughed. Karen remained quiet. I noticed her carefully watching everyone. Perhaps even she was beginning to understand that this conversation had not unfolded the way my family expected. Jason spoke again. Angela, you have to think practically. He almost never called me Angela. Hearing it now felt strangely cold. This property could change your retirement. My retirement is fine. Emily reached across the table. Mom, please listen. Something inside her voice frightened me. Not anger, not cruelty, desperation. We worry about you. I looked at her carefully. Since when? She blinked. What does that mean? You haven't visited in nearly 6 weeks. Emily shifted in her chair. You know how busy we are, but now we're discussing selling my house. Jason interrupted. We aren't saying that. Karen quickly added. I'm simply here to answer questions. Questions. The word echoed inside my head. What questions? Whose questions? Certainly not mine. Lily looked around the table. Are you moving, Grandma? No, sweetheart. Emily spoke gently. No one is saying that, but even Lily could feel the tension. She became quiet. Noah finally spoke. "Mom." Emily looked at him. "Not now." He lowered his eyes. That small exchange told me more than anything else. Noah already knew. Perhaps he had known for weeks, maybe months, and he clearly didn't want to be part of it. Karen opened her portfolio. I remember every detail. The sound of the zipper, the papers sliding against each other, the neat stack of documents. Something inside me suddenly became very still. She removed several pages. Again, she said softly, "This is just information." Jason nodded. "Exactly." Karen placed a sheet on the table. "Estimated market value." My eyes immediately found the number, $780,000. For a moment, I didn't recognize my own house. I saw a price, not the kitchen where Emily learned to bake cookies, not the hallway where Robert carried Christmas decorations, not the bedroom where I held my husband's hand as he took his final breath. Just a number. $780,000. Emily spoke carefully. "Mom, this kind of opportunity doesn't come often." I stared at the paper. "How long have you been discussing this?" Silence. Jason answered. "A few weeks." I looked at Emily. She looked away. A few weeks, Karen remained absolutely still. Noah quietly said, "It's been longer." Emily turned immediately. "Noah?" But the damage was done. I looked at my grandson. "How long?" He hesitated. Jason's voice hardened. "You don't need to answer that." The room felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. The candles beside Robert's picture continued to burn. And suddenly, I understood why Emily had seemed distant for months. The questions about property taxes, the conversations about retirement, the concern about living alone. This had not begun recently. It had been building, planning, discussing. And somehow, everyone had participated except me. Emily had participated except me. Emily reached for my hand. "Mom, please don't make this into something terrible." I slowly pulled my hand away. "What exactly is this?" Her eyes filled with tears. "We just think you deserve something easier." Easier reached for my hand. "Mom, please don't make this into something terrible." I slowly pulled my hand away. "What exactly is this?" Her eyes filled with tears. "We just think you deserve something easier." "Easier?" Jason nodded. "A smaller place, a retirement community, less maintenance." Karen carefully added, "Many people your age downsize." My age. There it was. Not Angela, not Mom, not Grandma. A woman of a certain age. A woman who apparently no longer needed the home she had spent half her life building. I looked around the dining room. Robert's chair, the curtains I sewed, the cabinet he built, the scratches on the floor from Emily's roller skates, the height marks on the doorway, the photographs, the memories. And suddenly I realized nobody at that table was looking at my house. They were looking at its value. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree Robert had planted. Its branches tapped softly against the window. I could almost hear him. "Pay attention, Angie. Something is wrong." Karen cleared her throat. "If you'd like, I can explain the selling process." I looked directly at her. For the first time all evening, she seemed uncomfortable. Because even she could now see what this really was. Not a family discussion. Not concern, not a birthday celebration. Something else. Something that had arrived at my dinner table, disguised as love. And for the first time that evening, I became afraid of what my daughter might say next. No one touched the cake. The candles had burned halfway down beside Robert's photograph, and the roast had grown cold on the table. Outside, darkness had settled over the neighborhood, and the lights from the street reflected against the dining room windows. Karen quietly placed her papers back into her folder. Perhaps she hoped the conversation would end. It didn't. Emily folded her hands together and looked directly at me. Mom, please don't misunderstand what we're trying to do. I looked at my daughter. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to run through this house wearing pigtails and carrying stuffed animals. But that little girl was gone. Sitting across from me was a 42-year-old woman who had brought a realtor to my birthday dinner. What exactly are you trying to do? I asked. Emily took a deep breath. We think this house is too much for you. The words landed softly, but they hurt. Jason immediately stepped in. It's a lot of maintenance. Karen remained silent. The stairs, Emily continued. The yard. The repairs. The winters. I nodded slowly. Manage. But what if something happens? What kind of something? Emily hesitated. What if you fall? What if you get sick? What if nobody finds you? Those fears had crossed my mind before. Every widow who lives alone eventually thinks about those things. But hearing my daughter use them at my own birthday dinner felt different. It felt less like concern and more like persuasion. Jason leaned forward. There are wonderful retirement communities now. I'm not looking for one. You haven't looked. I don't want to. Emily's voice softened. Mom, we're just thinking about your future. I glanced toward Robert's chair. 35 years earlier, he and I had stood in an empty field, holding blueprints that neither of us fully understood. We had borrowed money, worked overtime, skipped vacations, postponed buying new cars. There were years when we counted every dollar. Years when we worried about making mortgage payments. Years when I taught school during the day and tutored students in the evenings. Robert took extra shifts. He repaired neighbors' appliances. He worked weekends. This house had not simply appeared. We built it, brick by brick, payment by payment, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now my daughter was discussing it. And now my daughter was discussing it as if it were an aging vehicle that needed to be traded in. Jason continued. You could move into one of those beautiful communities? Emily nodded. They have activities, restaurants, as if it were an aging vehicle that needed to be traded in. Jason continued. You could move into one of those beautiful communities. Emily nodded. They have activities, restaurants, medical services, friends your age, my age. Again. I folded my napkin carefully. What if I don't want to leave silence? Jason answered first. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. I looked directly at him. For whom? His expression changed slightly. For everyone. There it was. Not for me. For everyone. Lily looked confused. Grandma doesn't want to move. Emily immediately turned. Sweetheart, adults are talking, but Grandma likes her house. Nobody answered. Noah finally spoke. She does. Jason sighed. Noah. No, Dad. The boy looked at me. Grandma loves this house. I could see Robert in him. The same steady eyes, the same quiet honesty. Emily rubbed her forehead. This is becoming emotional. I almost laughed. Emotional. My husband died in this house. My daughter took her first steps in this house. Our Christmases happened here. Our arguments happened here. Our healing happened here. And I was the emotional one. Karen finally spoke. Mrs. Scott, there's absolutely no pressure. I appreciated her trying, but the pressure was already sitting at the table. Emily reached into her purse. She removed a brochure, a retirement community, beautiful photographs, landscaped gardens, senior activities, fitness rooms, private apartments. She placed it in front of me. We visited last week. I stared at the brochure. Jason and I. Without me, Emily swallowed. We wanted information. How thoughtful. She looked hurt. Mom. No. Tell me. Did you pick out an apartment too? No. Did you decide where I would live? Jason interrupted. You're making this sound worse than it is. I turned toward him. Am I? His jaw tightened. The polite version of Jason was beginning to disappear. The version he showed clients, neighbors, church friends. The real Jason was impatient, controlling, always convinced he knew best. Robert noticed it years ago. I remembered him once saying, "That man always walks into a room like he already owns it." At the time, I thought he was being too harsh. Now I wasn't so sure. Emily's voice trembled. Mom, we're worried. Why now? What? You've had worried. Why now? What you've had 4 years since your father died. She looked stunned. Why now? Nobody answered. I continued. I've lived alone for 4 years. Yes, I've paid my bills. Yes, I take care of the house. Yes, I drive. 4 years since your father died. She looked stunned. Why now? Nobody answered. I continued. I've lived alone for 4 years. Yes, I've paid my bills. Yes, I take care of the house. Yes, I drive. Yes. So why tonight? The room became very still. Because it was the question none of them wanted to answer. Why tonight? Why my birthday? Why the realtor? Why the brochures? Why the market analysis? Why the discussions that apparently happened without me? Jason finally spoke. Because housing prices are high. The words escaped before he could stop them. Emily immediately looked at him. Karen looked down. Noah closed his eyes, and suddenly everything became clearer. Not safety, not loneliness, not stairs, not concern. Money. The house had become money. $780,000. Maybe more. A number. A solution. An opportunity. Emily quickly tried to recover. That's not what he meant. Yes, it is. Mom! No, Emily! My voice surprised even me. I rarely raised it. I had spent 40 years teaching children. Patience became part of my personality. But now something inside me had awakened. When did my home become an investment? Emily's eyes filled with tears. We're struggling. The room fell silent. There it was. Not concern. Not retirement. Struggle. Jason immediately spoke. We all struggle. How? Emily looked down. Things have been difficult. What things neither answered. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine fear in my daughter's face. Not fear for me, fear for herself, fear for her family. And suddenly, I realized there was much more happening than they were willing to tell me. Karen quietly closed her folder completely. I think perhaps this conversation should happen privately. Jason shook his head.
No, we're already here. Emily wiped her eyes. Mom, we only want what's best. I looked around the room. At Noah, at Lily, at Robert's photograph, at the birthday cake, at the woman who sold houses, at the daughter I no longer recognized. And I heard myself ask the question that had been growing inside me all evening. Did you already decide to sell my house before you came here? Emily didn't answer. Jason didn't answer. And that silence frightened me more than anything they had said, because suddenly I realized they had not come to discuss my future. They had come believing my future had already been decided. Nobody answered my question. Did you already decide to sell my house before you came here? Emily stared at the table. Jason looked irritated. Karen sat perfectly still. And suddenly, I understood something that frightened me more than the conversation itself. I was the last person to know. The realization settled over me slowly. Not because they had brought a realtor, not because they wanted me to move, but because decisions about my life had already been discussed without me. I looked at Emily. How long? She swallowed. Mom, how long have you been talking about selling my house? Jason answered first. A few months. Emily quickly turned toward him. Jason, what? She asked. A few months. 3 simple words. 3 words that suddenly explained every strange phone call, every canceled visit, every uncomfortable conversation. How many months? Emily spoke quietly. Since spring. Spring. It was October. Almost 6 months. For nearly half a year, my daughter had been discussing my home, my future, and my life with other people. I was 68 years old, not confused, not incapable, not ill. Yet somehow, everyone else had become part of the conversation. Everyone except me. Noah spoke softly. Grandma didn't know. Jason sighed. We were trying to find the right time. My birthday. No one answered. Karen finally looked uncomfortable. As I said earlier, Mrs. Scott, I understood that everyone had already discussed. We had. Jason interrupted. Emily closed her eyes. No, we hadn't. The silence that followed felt heavy. Karen looked at my daughter. My daughter looked at the table, and for the first time all evening, I realized Karen might not actually be the villain in this story. Perhaps she believed I had invited her. Perhaps she thought I had agreed. Perhaps she imagined this was a family meeting. If so, she had walked into a disaster she never expected. Jason reached toward the papers. Let's stay focused. I looked at him, focused on what? The reality. What reality? The house. There it was again. The house. Never my feelings, never my wishes. The house. He slid one of the documents closer to me. Karen's market report, estimated value, comparable sales, projected profits. I noticed handwritten notes in the margins, dates, numbers, questions. Somebody had studied these papers carefully. Very carefully. Whose writing is this? Emily looked down. Jason answered. Mine. Why? Because this is important. I continued reading. There were photographs. My stomach tightened. Photographs of my living room, my kitchen, the backyard, the upstairs hallway. I looked up slowly. Who took these? Emily hesitated. We did. When? During Easter. My chest suddenly hurt. Easter. The children had been hunting eggs in the backyard. I had made ham. Robert's favorite pie. After dinner, Jason said he wanted to see the renovations in the upstairs bathroom. Emily said she wanted to show Lily her old bedroom. I remembered hearing footsteps, doors opening. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, I looked down at the photographs. My bedroom, my hallway, my dining room. Images taken without my knowledge, without my permission. The room suddenly felt colder. You photographed my house. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please. You photographed my house. We only wanted information. Information for whom Jason's patience finally disappeared. For us. Everyone became quiet. Even he seemed surprised by his answer. For us. Not for me. For them. Lily looked frightened. Dad. Jason rubbed his forehead. No one is doing anything wrong. Noah spoke. Then, why didn't you tell Grandma nobody answered? The boy looked at his mother. Mom. Emily's face collapsed. We didn't know how. I almost laughed. My daughter was 42 years old. She had raised children, managed a household, handled mortgages and taxes, but somehow, she didn't know how to tell her mother that she wanted to sell her home. Karen quietly closed her folder. I can leave if you'd like. No, Jason said. Yes, I said. Everyone looked at me. I turned toward Karen. This isn't your fault. She looked relieved. Thank you. You were invited under false information. Emily immediately shook her head. That isn't true. I looked at her. Did you tell her I knew she was coming? Emily didn't answer. Karen's expression changed. She looked directly at Emily. You said your mother wanted information. The room became silent, very silent, and suddenly even Karen understood. Emily had lied, not only to me, to the realtor as well. Emily began crying. I just wanted everyone together. Why? Because you never listen. The words shocked me. I never listen. You always say no. No to what? To help. I leaned back in my chair. What help? Emily stood up. You won't move. You won't talk about the future. You won't think about what happens if you get sick. You won't make plans. I stared at her. Then I spoke quietly. I buried your father. She froze. The room became still. I sat beside him while he died. My voice trembled. I signed papers. I paid bills. I learned to live alone. I survived losing the person I loved most. Tears filled my eyes. And now you're telling me I can't manage my own life? Emily looked away. Jason spoke. This isn't about that. Then what is it about? Nobody answered. The grandfather clock struck 7. Outside, the wind shook the branches of Robert's maple tree. Noah finally stood. I think Grandpa would be upset. The words hit all of us, especially Emily. Robert adored his grandchildren, and Noah had inherited his honesty. Emily wiped her face. You don't understand. Then explain it, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Jason stepped forward. Emily doesn't have to explain everything. Actually, I said quietly, she does, because something was missing. The numbers, the pressure, the urgency, the 6 months of planning, the photographs, the market reports, the brochures. None of it explained why tonight had become so important. There was something bigger, something neither Emily nor Jason wanted to discuss. And then I noticed something lying partially inside Jason's folder. A bank envelope. A red stamp. Past due.
Only a second. Only a glimpse. But enough. Jason immediately closed the folder. Too quickly. And for the first time that evening, I began to wonder if my daughter wasn't trying to save me at all. Perhaps she was trying to save herself. Or perhaps she was trying to save her husband. Because people rarely become this desperate without a reason. And suddenly, the house no longer felt like the goal. It felt like the solution to a problem they had not yet confessed. I looked around my dining room, at the half-eaten dinner, at the birthday cake nobody touched, at Robert's photograph, at my daughter, at my son-in-law, at the papers spread across my table. And I realized something terrifying. This conversation had never really been about where I would live. It was about money. And whatever trouble they were hiding had become serious enough to bring a realtor to my birthday dinner. For several seconds, nobody moved. The grandfather clock ticked. The candles beside Robert's photograph flickered. Outside, the wind continued to push against the maple tree. Inside my dining room, the truth had begun to reveal itself, but not enough. Not yet. Jason had closed his folder so quickly that even Lily looked startled. Emily sat quietly crying. Noah stared at his father. Karen looked as though she wished she had never accepted the invitation. And I sat there wondering how my own birthday dinner had become an intervention. I looked at the folder again. The corner of the bank envelope was still visible. Red letters. Past due. Jason noticed my eyes. He immediately moved the folder beside his chair. Too late. I had seen enough. The room remained silent until Karen finally spoke. Perhaps this conversation should continue another day. Jason shook his head. No. Emily looked exhausted. Jason, we've already started. I folded my hands. Started what? He took a deep breath.
Angela, we're trying to help you make smart decisions.
I looked directly at him.
Then answer one question.
What?
Why are you in such a hurry?
He blinked.
What do you mean, Angela, we're trying to help you make smart decisions?
I looked directly at him.
Then answer one question. What? Why are you in such a hurry?
He blinked.
What do you mean? You've spent 6 months discussing my house.
Yes.
You brought a realtor.
Yes.
You brought market reports.
Yes.
You visited retirement communities.
Emily lowered her eyes. You photographed my home. Nobody answered.
So why tonight?
Jason rubbed his face.
There isn't a deadline.
The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. And suddenly, I remembered something Robert used to say.
When people rush you, Angie, they're usually working against time, not for your benefit.
For the first time all evening, I heard his voice very clearly. I looked at Karen.
May I ask you something?
Of course.
Did my daughter ask you to prepare paperwork?
Karen hesitated. Jason spoke.
That's irrelevant.
I ignored him. Karen looked uncomfortable.
There was a preliminary market package.
What does that mean?
She swallowed. I prepared comparable sales estimated values and a possible listing strategy.
Emily began crying again.
Mom, please.
I continued.
Did you prepare anything else?
Karen looked at Jason, then at me.
A potential timeline.
The room became silent.
A timeline, not a conversation, not possibilities.
A timeline.
How long? Karen answered quietly.
30 to 60 days.
Lily looked confused.
What does that mean?
Nobody spoke.
The little girl looked at me. Grandma? I forced a smile.
It means people sometimes make plans, but you're not moving. My throat tightened. No, sweetheart? Jason suddenly stood. We're making this emotional. I looked up. My husband died in this house. He remained standing. My daughter grew up here. He crossed his arms. I learned to live without the man I loved here. He looked away. If that's emotional, then yes, this is emotional. Emily quietly whispered, We didn't mean to hurt you. The words hurt most because I believed her. My daughter did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy me. Something had happened, something large enough to make her ignore my feelings, large enough to justify this evening in her mind. Noah finally spoke. Mom, you should tell Grandma. Emily looked terrified. Not now. When Jason turned sharply. Noah, but the boy kept talking. You've been arguing for months. Emily's face went pale. Please stop. No! The 17-year-old looked directly at me. Hey, fight about money all the time. But the boy kept talking. You've been arguing for months. Emily's face went pale. Please stop. No. The 17-year-old looked directly at me. They fight about money all the time. Jason's jaw tightened. Enough. Noah stood. I hear it every night. Emily began crying harder. Please, the credit cards. Noah. The entire room froze. Credit cards. There it was. A small piece. Only a fragment, but enough to confirm my fears. Jason looked furious. You don't know what you're talking about. Noah's eyes filled with tears. I hear everything. Lily looked frightened. What's happening? Nobody answered. I suddenly realized that my grandchildren had probably lived inside this tension for months, listening, worrying, watching their parents argue, watching money become a problem, watching my house slowly become a solution. Karen quietly closed her briefcase. I really think I should leave. I nodded. I think that's best. She stood. Before leaving, she looked directly at me. Mrs. Scott, I sincerely apologize. I surprised myself. You don't owe me an apology. Her eyes softened. Thank you. She picked up her coat. But before reaching the door, she turned back. May I say something? Nobody answered. She looked at Emily. Real estate decisions only work when everyone wants the same thing. She looked at me. And I don't believe that's true here. Then she left. The front door closed. And suddenly, it was only family. No stranger, no realtor, no witness. Just us. Somehow, that felt worse. Jason sat down again. We've embarrassed ourselves enough. I looked at him. Have we? Emily wiped her eyes. Mom, we're trying. To do what? To protect everyone. Everyone. Again. The word bothered me. Not me. Everyone. I slowly stood and walked toward the dining room cabinet. Inside, behind old photo albums and Robert's fishing equipment, sat a small metal box. I opened it. Inside were insurance papers, tax documents, mortgage records. Robert organized everything, always. Jason watched me. What are you doing? I returned to the table, thinking. Emily looked exhausted. About what? I opened the box. Inside sat several folders. House insurance, property taxes, mortgage satisfaction papers, and beneath them, another envelope. Brown. Old. Robert's handwriting. My heart skipped. I had not opened it since he died. Robert always handled legal matters. He once told me, Keep this with the house papers. At the time, I didn't ask questions. I trusted him. I looked at the envelope, then at Emily, then at Jason. Something suddenly felt wrong, very wrong. I remembered a conversation years earlier, Robert sitting at this very table, talking about lawyers, property, protection. I had barely listened. Life was busy then. Emily was younger. The grandchildren were small. None of it seemed important. But suddenly, those memories returned. I slowly looked at my daughter. Emily. She looked up. Yes. Have you ever seen the deed? Confusion crossed her face. The deed. The property deed, Jason answered. Of course, the house has a deed. I looked at him. Have you seen it, No? Emily frowned. Why I gently touched the old envelope. Because Robert handled all of that. The room became quiet again. I suddenly remembered my husband saying something after updating our estate documents. If anyone ever pressures you, read everything before signing anything. At the time, I laughed. Who would pressure me? Who would ever do that? Now I looked around my own dining room, my crying daughter, my angry son-in-law, my frightened grandchildren, the papers, the photographs, the bank envelope, and the old file sitting inside Robert's box. For the first time that evening, I felt something change inside me. The fear was disappearing. The confusion was disappearing. In its place came something else. Calm, very calm. I looked at Emily, then Jason, then the old envelope, and quietly I asked the question that stopped the entire room. May I see the deed copy you've been using? Nobody answered. Jason's face changed. Emily looked confused. And suddenly, I realized something they had never considered. They had spent 6 months studying my house. But they had never once studied the papers my husband left behind. Nobody answered me. The old envelope remained in my hands. The room was quiet except for the soft humming of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock. Emily looked confused. Jason looked irritated. Noah seemed curious. Only I understood that something inside me had changed. For most of the evening, I had felt hurt, confused, betrayed. But now another feeling had begun to rise. Memory. I ran my fingers across Robert's handwriting. His handwriting had always been strong and deliberate. Even after 35 years of marriage, I could recognize it instantly. Angela. House documents. Keep safe. The ink had faded slightly. Robert had written it nearly 6 years earlier. Long before he became sick. Long before we knew cancer would take him. Long before I imagined sitting at my own birthday dinner, defending the home we built together. Emily finally spoke. Mom. I looked up. Yes. What does that mean? I looked down at the envelope. I don't know. Long before I imagined sitting at my own birthday dinner, defending the home we built together. Emily finally spoke. Mom. I looked up. Yes. What does that mean? I looked down at the envelope. I don't know. That wasn't entirely true. Some part of me remembered. Not clearly. Only fragments. Robert sitting at the kitchen table. A conversation about attorneys. A meeting downtown. Papers. Signatures. His voice. At the time, I had barely paid attention. Robert handled legal matters. I handled the household. That had always been our arrangement. I slowly returned the envelope to the box. This conversation is finished tonight. Jason immediately objected. Angela. No. He fell silent. Emily wiped her eyes. "Mom, please don't shut us out." I looked at my daughter. For a moment, I saw the frightened little girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. She wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel. She was scared. But fear does strange things to people, and sometimes it teaches them to justify actions they would never normally take. "No one is being shut out," I said quietly. "But we're not discussing my house anymore tonight." Jason stood. "We came here to solve something." "No," I answered. "You came here to sell something." His face hardened. Emily looked exhausted. "Please stop." Lily had started crying quietly. Noah sat beside her. The poor children had walked into their grandmother's birthday dinner and found themselves sitting in the middle of an adult war. I suddenly felt ashamed, not because of anything I had done, because families are supposed to protect children from moments like these. Robert always believed that. He used to say, "The adults carry the burdens. The kids carry enough already." I looked at Lily. "Sweetheart, would you help me in the kitchen?" She nodded immediately. Noah came too. For several minutes, we washed dishes while Emily and Jason remained in the dining room. The children stayed quiet. Eventually, Noah spoke. "Grandpa wouldn't want this." For several minutes, we washed dishes while Emily and Jason remained in the dining room. The children stayed quiet. Eventually, Noah spoke. "Grandpa wouldn't want this." I stopped drying a plate. "No, he loved this house. Yes, he loved you." The words nearly broke me. Lily hugged my arm. "You're not moving right." I kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart." Noah lowered his voice. "They've been fighting a lot." I looked at him. "How long?" "Months." "About money?" "Long." He nodded. "Dad lost some jobs." I stayed silent. "Mom cries sometimes." Lily looked down. "We hear them." My heart hurt for them. Children always hear more than adults think. And now I began to understand something. This wasn't just about Emily and Jason. The entire family had been living under pressure. Debt, fear, arguments. And somehow, my house had become the answer. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. I thought of Robert. How steady he had been. How careful. How protective. There was a reason he had left that envelope. I could feel it. Eventually, the children returned to the living room. Jason had his coat on. Emily stood near the front door. Neither of them looked at me. "We're leaving," Jason said. I nodded. "Good night." Emily's eyes filled again. "Mom." I waited. "I love you." The words hurt. Because I believed her, and because love sometimes causes more damage than hatred. "I love you too." She looked surprised. Perhaps she expected anger. Perhaps she expected me to throw them out. Instead, I felt tired, very tired. Jason opened the front door. Cold October air entered the house. Noah hugged me. Lily hugged me. Emily stood in front of me for several seconds. Then she whispered, "We're scared." I looked at her. "What happened?" She shook her head. "Not tonight." And then she left. The door closed. The house became quiet again. For the first time all evening, I was alone. I slowly returned to the dining room. The candles had burned out. The cake sat untouched. The market reports remained on the table. Robert's photograph watched over the room. I sat in his chair, something I rarely did. It still felt like his. I looked at his face in the picture, the familiar smile, the eyes that always seemed to know more than they revealed. "You knew something, didn't you?" Of course there was no answer, only silence, but memories began returning. Fragments, Robert talking after his first cancer treatments. "I need to organize things." I remembered saying, "You aren't going anywhere." He smiled. "Maybe not, but if I do, I want you protected." Protected. The word suddenly felt important. Protected from what? From whom? Certainly not our daughter. Robert adored Emily. He never imagined she would hurt me. Or did he? I stood and carried the metal box into the living room. The fire had nearly died in the fireplace. Outside, the wind continued moving through the maple tree. I sat in my chair. The same chair where Robert used to read newspapers. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside were several papers. Legal documents, letters, and one business card. David Reynolds, attorney at law. I recognized the name immediately. David had been Robert's closest friend for nearly 40 years. They played golf together, went fishing, worked on projects in the garage. David attended every Thanksgiving. After Robert died, we saw each other less often. Life simply moved on. There was also a note, written entirely in Robert's handwriting. My hands trembled. I unfolded it carefully. The letter began, "Angie, if you're reading this, something has happened that made you open these papers." Tears immediately filled my eyes. Even after 4 years, seeing his handwriting felt like hearing his voice. I continued reading. "Trust David. Read everything. Do not sign anything until you understand it. And remember that this house was built to protect you, not the other way around." I stopped breathing. Protect me. What did that mean? I turned the page. There were legal terms, property references, trust information, language I didn't understand. But one sentence caught my eye. "Any transfer or sale of the property shall require the express consent of Angela Scott." I read it twice, then 3 times. Why would Robert write that? Who was he protecting me from? Suddenly, I remembered one conversation years earlier. Emily and Jason had just bought their first house. Jason joked that someday they would inherit ours. Robert smiled politely. But later that evening he told me, "Never let anyone decide where you live." At the time, I thought he meant strangers, banks, insurance companies, the government. Now, sitting alone at nearly midnight, holding my husband's letter, I began to wonder if he had worried about something else. Something he never fully explained. I looked at David Reynolds' card. The office number was still there. For the first time all evening, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Because maybe Robert had left more than memories behind. Maybe he had left answers. And perhaps my husband had known long ago that someday I might need them. I barely slept that night. The letter from Robert remained on the coffee table beside me long after midnight. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to ashes, and the house had become silent again. But it was not the peaceful silence I had known during the past 4 years. This silence carried questions. Why had Robert written those instructions? Why had he told me not to sign anything? Why had he emphasized protection? And why did I suddenly feel as though my husband had anticipated something I never saw coming? At 2 a.m, I finally climbed the stairs. The old house creaked beneath my feet. Robert used to joke that the house talked to us at night. Every home has a voice, Angie. As I walked through the hallway, I touched the framed photographs. Emily at 6, Emily at 12, Emily graduating from college, Emily holding Noah as a baby. There had been so many beautiful years. That was what made everything hurt. People imagine betrayal as something sudden, but family betrayal is different. It arrives carrying memories. It arrives wearing familiar faces. And because you love the people hurting you, you keep searching for reasons to forgive them. The next morning, I woke to rain. Ohio rain in October always feels lonely. The maple leaves covered the yard. The sky was gray. I made coffee. For the first time in years, I sat at the kitchen table alone and read Robert's letter again. Trust David, read everything, do not sign anything. Protect you. The words seemed stronger in daylight. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Emily. I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to hear her voice. I answered. Hello? She sounded exhausted. Mom. Yes. There was silence. I didn't sleep. Neither did I. Another silence. Can we talk? About what? Her voice trembled. Everything. I looked out the kitchen window. The rain had become heavier. When I can come over,
I closed my eyes. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I think we both need time. Mom, please. Emily. Her breathing became shaky. I never wanted to hurt you. The pain in her voice felt genuine, and that made things more complicated. Villains are easier to fight than people we love. I know. No, you don't. Then help me understand. She didn't answer. Instead, she cried quietly. After nearly a minute, she finally whispered, "Things are bad." How bad? Silence. Emily.
She inhaled deeply. Jason doesn't want me to tell you. That sentence told me almost everything. The pressure, the urgency, the fear, the secrecy. Jason, is he in trouble? She didn't answer directly. We've had problems. What kind? Financial. The word hung between us. Financial. The very thing I had suspected. I sat down. How serious, I don't know. I knew immediately that she was lying. People say I don't know when they know exactly how serious something is.
Emily. She began crying again. I don't want you to hate me. My eyes filled. You're my daughter, after last night. I said, you're my daughter. She became quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that frightened me. We could lose everything. Everything. Not struggling, not behind. Everything. How Jason's business. What happened? He had contracts canceled. How much money, Mom? How much? She finally whispered, a lot.
I thought about Noah, about Lily, about the arguments, the credit cards, the past due notice. And suddenly, I realized that my daughter had probably been living inside fear for many months. Fear makes people desperate. Desperate people convince themselves they are doing the right thing. Emily. Yes, did you want to sell my house? She cried. I didn't know what else to do. There it was. Not greed, not at first. Fear. But fear had slowly become entitlement. And entitlement had brought a realtor to my birthday dinner. Mom. Yes, please don't call David. My body became still. How do you know about David's silence? Then I understood. Jason. Did Jason know Robert had an attorney? Yes. How he and Dad talked years ago. Another piece of the puzzle. Did Robert say something? I don't remember. I believed she did remember. She simply didn't want to tell me. The conversation ended shortly afterward. She said she loved me. I said I loved her. And we hung up. The house became quiet again. But now the silence felt different. For the first time, I knew the truth. Emily was afraid. Jason was desperate. Their finances were collapsing. And my house had become their rescue plan. Around noon, Noah arrived unexpectedly. His old truck pulled into the driveway. When I opened the front door, he looked nervous. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. Can I come in? Of course. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place where his mother used to do homework, the same place where Robert taught him how to play chess. He looked older than 17. Worry does that to children. I shouldn't be here, he said. Why Dad would be angry. I poured him coffee. Well, don't tell him. He smiled slightly, the first smile I had seen from him in days. After several minutes, he spoke quietly. They owe a lot of money. How much I don't know exactly. Has your father told you? No, but I hear things. I nodded. Credit cards. Yes. Loans. Yes. He looked down. There was a man at our house. What man, I think, from the bank? My stomach tightened. When? 2 weeks ago. What happened? Mom cried. I sat quietly. Dad said everything would be okay after the house sold. The words hit me harder than anything else. After the house sold, not if. After. As though it had already happened. As though my future had already been decided. Noah looked up. Grandma? Yes, are you angry? I thought carefully. No. He seemed surprised. You aren't? No. What are you? I looked toward Robert's photograph. The old engineer with careful hands and quiet wisdom. I think I'm finally beginning to understand. Noah nodded. He looked relieved. Before leaving, he hugged me. Grandpa trusted you. I held him tightly. Why do you say that? He smiled. Because he always said Grandma was stronger than everyone thought. After he left, I sat alone again. The rain had stopped. Sunlight began appearing through the clouds. I picked up David Reynolds' business card. The number stared back at me. My husband's closest friend. The man Robert trusted. The man who knew the truth. For 2 days, I had avoided making the call. Perhaps because I was afraid. Perhaps because I already knew that once I spoke to David, everything would change. I picked up the telephone, dialed the number. The receptionist answered. Reynolds Law Office. My hands trembled. My name is Angela Scott. There was a pause. Then the woman said something that sent chills through my entire body. Mrs. Scott? Mr. Reynolds has been expecting your call for several years. I held the phone tightly. Mrs. Scott, Mr. Reynolds has been expecting your call for several years. The receptionist's words echoed inside my head. Several years. Not several days. Not several weeks. Years. I suddenly felt as if Robert had reached through time and placed his hand on my shoulder. Can he see me today? I asked. One moment. Soft music played through the receiver. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight touched the wet leaves in the backyard, making them shine. A familiar voice finally came onto the line. Angela. I closed my eyes. David. His voice had aged, so had mine. I've been wondering when you would call, I swallowed. I knew Robert hoped you never would. The answer confused me. What does that mean? There was silence. Then he said quietly, "It means he wanted you to live peacefully." My chest tightened. David, my daughter brought a realtor to my birthday dinner. He didn't sound surprised. When can you come in? Today? Good. David? Yes. Am I missing something? He paused. Probably. Those words stayed with me all morning. Probably. At 11 o'clock, I drove downtown. The Reynolds Law Office occupied the same brick building it had used for decades. Robert and David had worked together on countless legal documents there. I had only visited twice. Robert always handled everything. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mrs. Scott. I smiled weakly. David's office door opened. He looked older. Much older. His hair was completely white now. His shoulders had become smaller. But his eyes were exactly the same, kind, steady. He walked toward me, and before either of us spoke, he hugged me. For several seconds, neither of us said anything, because grief recognizes grief. He had buried his wife 3 years earlier. I had buried Robert. We both understood. Finally, he pulled away. You look like him when you're worried. I laughed softly. That's impossible. No, it's true. His office smelled of old books and coffee. Robert would have loved it. David sat behind his desk. I handed him the envelope. He studied the handwriting. Typical Robert. You remember this. I helped him prepare it. My heart skipped. So you know what's inside? Yes. Then tell me. Instead of answering, he opened a file cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he removed a thick folder. Robert and Angela Scott. He placed it carefully on the desk. I've kept this for 6 years. My hands trembled. Why? Because Robert asked me to. Why? David leaned back, and then he said something that completely surprised me. Robert worried about Jason. I stared at him. What? He never disliked Emily. I know. He adored your daughter. Yes, but he worried about Jason. I couldn't speak. The office suddenly felt very quiet when several years before he became sick. Why? David folded his hands. He thought Jason viewed the house differently. What does that mean? He viewed it as money. My heart pounded. How could Robert know that David smiled sadly? Because your husband noticed everything. I remembered dozens of family dinners, Jason discussing property values, talking about neighborhoods, mentioning real estate, joking about inheritances. At the time, it never bothered me, but Robert had noticed. David continued. One afternoon, Jason said something. What? He said that someday the house would solve everyone's problems. I felt cold. What did Robert say? He laughed, and after Jason left, he called me. My hands gripped the chair. What did he say? David looked directly into my eyes. He said, if anything ever happens to me, I want Angela protected. Tears filled my eyes. Protected. The word again. David opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, property records, trust papers, signatures, and one document with Robert's signature. Your husband created a trust. I frowned. A trust? Yes. Why didn't he tell me he tried? I searched my memory. Hospital visits, cancer treatments, medications, fear. I had probably forgotten. David continued. The trust protects the property. How? He slid the document toward me. The house cannot be sold, transferred, or borrowed against without your direct written consent. I nodded. That makes sense. He looked at me carefully. There is more. My stomach tightened. What Robert included a protective clause. I looked down. The legal language was difficult. David pointed. In simple terms, if anyone attempts to pressure, manipulate, or improperly influence you regarding the house, they lose certain inheritance rights connected to the property. I looked up. What? He nodded. Robert was very specific. I could barely breathe. You mean Emily? Potentially. No. Angela. I shook my head. No. Robert wouldn't do that. David's voice softened. He wasn't trying to punish Emily. Then why? He was protecting you. The room became blurry. Robert had seen something I never noticed. Perhaps not danger, perhaps only possibility, but enough to act. Did Emily know he was protecting you? The room became blurry. Robert had seen something I never noticed. Perhaps not danger, perhaps only possibility, but enough to act. Did Emily know number Jason? Absolutely not. I looked down at the papers. My husband had quietly built a wall around me, a wall I never knew existed. Tears rolled down my face. He knew. David nodded. He worried about his own daughter. No. Then who? He answered gently. About what fear and money can make people do. I thought of Emily crying, of the debt, of the pressure, of the realtor, of my birthday dinner. David continued. Robert loved Emily deeply. I know. He also knew people behave differently when they're desperate. I sat quietly. Because suddenly, my husband no longer seemed suspicious. He seemed wise, very wise. David reached into another folder. There is something else. What a copy of the deed. He handed it to me. I looked at my own name. Angela Scott. Robert Scott. Property owner. Trust provisions. Protection language. Everything legal. Everything documented. Everything real. Robert wanted you to have this. I touched the paper. For the first time since my husband died, I felt as though he was still taking care of me. David spoke softly. What happened at your birthday? I told him everything. The realtor, the market reports, the photographs, the retirement brochures, the pressure. Jason, Emily, the debt, the bank envelope. When I finished, he sat silently. Finally, he said, You need to be very careful. Why? Because desperate people sometimes convince themselves they're doing the right thing. I looked at the deed, at Robert's signature, at the trust, at the years my husband spent protecting me without telling me. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. Emily and Jason had spent 6 months planning to sell my house, but they had never read a single legal document. They thought they understood the property. They thought they understood ownership. They thought they understood inheritance. They were wrong. Very wrong. As I prepared to leave, David handed me an envelope. Keep this with you. What is it? Copies. Of everything. He nodded. What should I do? David looked directly at me. Wait, for what? For them to ask again. I frowned. Why? His answer sent a chill through my body. Because when they do, you'll finally learn how much of this belongs to Emily and how much belongs to Jason. I drove home from David Reynolds' office with Robert's documents resting on the passenger seat. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds. The roads were still wet from the morning rain, and the maple trees along the streets of Columbus glowed red and gold.
Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside me, nothing was.
For 4 years after Robert died, I had believed grief was the hardest thing I would ever face. I was wrong. Grief leaves you lonely, but betrayal makes you question your memories. As I stopped at a red light, I looked at the envelope beside me. My husband had spent the final years of his life quietly preparing for something I never imagined. Not because he stopped trusting our daughter, because he understood human weakness, because he knew money changes people, because he knew fear can become pressure. And now I had to decide what to do. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed another vehicle parked outside. Emily's SUV. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. For several seconds, I simply sat there. I wasn't ready, but perhaps neither was she. She was sitting on the front porch, alone. No Jason, no children, just my daughter. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen. When she saw me, she stood. "Mom." I climbed out slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you." I looked at the house. At the porch Robert built. At the swing where Emily used to sit when she was a teenager. Everything suddenly felt very old and very fragile. "Come inside." We sat in the kitchen. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Emily said, "Did you see David?" I looked at her. "Yes." She lowered her eyes. "I knew you would. How Dad told me years ago." "That surprised me. He told you about David?" She nodded.
"After he got sick. What did he say?"
Her eyes filled with tears.
"He said if anything happened to him,
You should never be pressured.
the word, again,
Pressured. Robert had used it. David had used it. Now Emily. I sat quietly. "What else did he say?" She hesitated. "He said the house belonged to your life." I felt my throat tighten. "He said nobody had the right to take it away." Tears appeared in both our eyes.
"Then why did you do this?"
She couldn't answer, at least not immediately. Instead, she stared at the kitchen table. The same table where she had done homework. The same table where Robert taught her multiplication. The same table where she announced her engagement. After a long silence, she whispered, "Because I was scared." I waited. "Jason's business is falling apart."
"How bad?"
She rubbed her hands together.
"Very bad."
"How much debt?"
She looked away. "About 300,000.
My heart stopped. $300,000. I understood now. Completely. This wasn't about property taxes, or retirement communities, or stairs. This was panic. What happened? $300,000. I understood now. Completely. This wasn't about property taxes, or retirement communities, or stairs. This was panic. What happened? He borrowed money. For what? Equipment, employees, projects, expansion. She took a deep breath. Then contracts started disappearing. When? Almost a year ago. I thought about the timeline, spring, the discussions, the photographs, the realtor, the pressure. Everything suddenly aligned. Does Jason think selling my house will save him? Emily began crying. He thinks it will save us. Us. Not him, not her, the family. At least that was how they justified it. Did he ask you to do this? She shook her head. No. Then whose idea was it? Her silence answered. Jason. Perhaps not entirely, but enough. He said your house was worth nearly $800,000. I remained silent. He said you'd never need all that money. It's not his money. I know.
Do you? She looked down. I didn't at first. The honesty surprised me. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, my daughter was finally telling me the truth. I was terrified, she said. I couldn't sleep. Do you? She looked down. I didn't at first. The honesty surprised me. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, my daughter was finally telling me the truth. I was terrified, she said. I couldn't sleep. Bills kept arriving. The credit cards, the loans, the bank, the phone calls. Tears ran down her face. I thought if you sold the house, everyone would survive. I spoke quietly. Everyone except me. She covered her face. I know. The kitchen became silent. Outside, leaves moved across the yard. Robert always loved October. He said autumn teaches us how to let things go. I wondered if he ever imagined our daughter sitting here confessing that she had nearly sold our home to save her husband. Emily. She looked up. Does Jason know about David? Yes. Does he know about the trust? No. The deed? No. I nodded slowly. For the first time, I began to understand something David had said. Wait, learn who this belongs to. Emily continued. He thinks you'll eventually agree. Why? Because he thinks you love us. The words hurt. Because they were true. I did love them. But love and surrender are not the same thing. Do you want me to sell the house? She looked directly at me, and for the first time since my birthday, I believed her answer. No. I stared at her. What changed? She wiped her eyes. Noah. What? He told me Grandpa would be ashamed. The room became quiet.
He said Grandma built this house too. He said we were treating you like a problem. She looked down. And he was right. I thought about my grandson, the boy who carried Robert's honesty, the boy who saw everything. Perhaps Robert had left more than a trust behind. Perhaps he had left himself inside Noah. Where is Jason? At home. Does he know you're here? No. That answer worried me, because desperate people dislike losing control. Is he angry? Emily laughed softly. He's always angry now. I remembered David's warning. Fear changes people. Debt changes people. Desperation changes people. Mom. Yes. What did David tell you? I looked toward Robert's photograph in the living room. The man who still seemed to be protecting me. He told me your father planned ahead. She became very still. How much ahead? I opened the envelope, removed the copy of the trust, and placed it gently on the table. Emily stared at the pages. What is this? Your father's final protection. She looked confused. For you? I nodded. For me? Her face slowly changed. Understanding. Fear. Shock. What does it say? I folded my hands. Your father made sure nobody could force me to sell this house. She whispered, Nobody, nobody. She stared at the documents, and then she asked the question I had been waiting to hear. Mom, yes, what happens if someone tries? I looked at my daughter, and for the first time since my birthday dinner, I understood that the real confrontation had not happened yet, because Emily was frightened. But Jason still believed the house belonged to him. and he had no idea what Robert had left behind. Emily sat motionless. The trust documents remained between us on the kitchen table. Outside, the sun had begun to set behind the maple tree Robert planted 30 years earlier. Golden light filled the kitchen, touching the old cabinets, the worn countertops, and the photographs that had watched our family grow. My daughter looked smaller somehow. Not younger, not weaker, simply tired. "Dad really did this," she whispered. I nodded. "He planned it years ago." She stared at the papers. "He thought I would do something like this." The pain in her voice was genuine. I reached across the table. "No? Then why?" "Because your father understood people." She looked down. "And he understood Jason." That sentence hung in the air. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "He never trusted him. Not completely." Her eyes filled again. "Why didn't he tell me I thought about Robert?" "He hated confrontation. He believed people deserved opportunities to become better. Perhaps he hoped Jason would change. Perhaps he hoped he was wrong. Perhaps he simply wanted peace. He loved you too much to force you to choose." Emily began crying. "I feel like I've failed him." I looked toward Robert's photograph. "No, but I did. You became afraid." She covered her face. "I let Jason convince me." There it was, the truth. Not greed, not inheritance, influence, pressure, fear. The front door suddenly opened. Both of us looked up. Jason. He stepped inside quickly. His face was tense. His eyes immediately found Emily. "There you are." Emily stood. "I needed time. You left your phone." He finally noticed me. "Angela?" I remained seated. "Jason." He looked at the papers on the table. "What's this?" Nobody answered. His eyes narrowed. "Did you see David?" The question came instantly. He already knew. Or perhaps he feared it. "Yes." He removed his jacket. "Good, good." The word surprised me. He sat down. Perhaps he still believed he could control the conversation. "We all need to be practical." Emily looked at him. "Jason?" "No." He turned toward me. "Angela, nobody wants to hurt you." I folded my hands. "Then stop trying to sell my house." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand our situation. You're right." "Then let me explain." Emily suddenly looked frightened. "Jason, enough." His voice became sharp, not loud, but sharp. The kind of voice people use when they have been losing control for too long. He looked directly at me. "We owe money." "I know." His eyes moved toward Emily. "You know." His eyes moved toward Emily. "You told her." She nodded. He exhaled heavily. "Fine." He leaned forward. The business collapsed. "How much? 320,000. The number seemed even larger spoken aloud. He continued. "Contracts disappeared. Told her." She nodded. He exhaled heavily. "Fine." He leaned forward. The business collapsed. "How much?" 320,000. The number seemed even larger spoken aloud. He continued. "Contracts disappeared. Equipment payments. Lawsuits. Interest." He rubbed his forehead. "I tried fixing it." I remained quiet. "Banks won't help. Investors won't help. Nobody helps. Then his eyes moved toward the house. But this could. The words chilled me. Not because he said them, because he believed them. The house, not my home, not Robert's legacy, not 35 years of sacrifice. A solution, a number, an answer. Emily spoke softly. Jason. No. He stood. You have $800,000 sitting here. No. He looked at me. Yes. No. What? This house isn't sitting here. He frowned. Of course it is. I looked around the kitchen. This is Robert's chair. I pointed. That wall still has the marks from Emily's height measurements. I pointed toward the hallway. Your children learned to ride bicycles in this driveway. I looked at him. You see money. I see my life. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then his frustration returned. People sell houses every day. People also keep them. You don't need this much house. There it is again. What I need? He crossed his arms. You live alone. Yes. You struggle with stairs. No. You need help. No. Emily looked terrified, because for the first time, Jason was no longer hiding behind concern. The mask had fallen. What do you want me to do? He asked. Lose everything, I answered quietly. You already lost something. What my trust? The room became silent. He stared at me. Emily looked down. I slowly reached toward the trust documents. There is something you should know. He looked at the papers. What is that? My husband prepared legal protections. His face changed. What protections? The house cannot be sold without my written consent. He laughed slightly. Of course. There is more. His expression changed. What more? I looked directly at him. If anyone attempts to pressure or improperly influence me regarding the property, there are consequences. He became very still. What consequences? Emily whispered Jason. He looked at her. What? She couldn't speak. I finally answered. Certain inheritance rights can be lost. The room froze. Jason stared at me. No. Yes. That can't be legal. It is. He looked toward Emily. She began crying. You didn't know? She shook her head. No! His face slowly lost color. You're saying Robert protected me? No. Yes. He began pacing. This is unbelievable. I remained calm, perhaps calmer than I had ever been, because Robert had given me something much greater than legal documents. He had given me certainty. You can't do this. I looked at him. I didn't. Robert wouldn't punish his daughter. He isn't. Jason stopped pacing. Then what's this protection? He laughed bitterly. For me, nobody answered. That silence became the answer. His eyes moved from me to Emily, then back to me. And suddenly, I saw something I had not seen before. Fear. Real fear. Not financial fear. Not business fear. The fear of losing control. Did David tell you all this? Yes. He looked away. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he quietly asked, What happens now? I looked at him. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I no longer felt angry. Only sad. Very sad. Now, I said softly, You tell me the entire truth. He looked exhausted. The entire truth. Yes. He sat down slowly. His shoulders collapsed, and after weeks of pressure, months of lies, and years of hidden fears, Jason finally whispered the words that changed everything. "The bank is taking the business." Emily closed her eyes. "And if they do," he continued, "they may take our house too." The room became silent, because now the real danger finally had a face. And for the first time, I understood exactly how desperate my daughter and son-in-law had become. "The bank is taking the business." Jason's words remained in the kitchen long after he stopped speaking. Outside evening had settled over the neighborhood. The last rays of sunlight had disappeared behind the maple tree, and the house that had once felt so warm now seemed to hold its breath. Emily sat silently. Jason stared at the floor, and I found myself thinking about Robert, because suddenly I understood something my husband had known years before I did. People do not become dangerous when they are evil. They become dangerous when they are desperate. "How long?" I finally asked. Jason rubbed his eyes. "The bank started calling 4 months ago." Emily looked down. "The construction company lost 2 major contracts." He nodded. "Then the equipment loans came due. And the credit cards. And the suppliers." His voice had changed. The anger was disappearing. Exhaustion had replaced it. I sat quietly. "How close are you?" He looked directly at me. "Very close." "To losing the business?" He swallowed. "Everything." Emily began crying again. "The house. The savings. The kids' college funds." She covered her face. I didn't know what else to do. For several moments, nobody spoke. I understood their fear. Losing a home is terrifying. Robert and I nearly lost ours during the recession in the early 80s. I remembered lying awake at night wondering how we would make mortgage payments. I remembered counting coins, skipping vacations, selling jewelry. Fear is powerful, but fear does not give someone the right to take another person's home. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Emily answered immediately. "Because I knew you'd say no." I looked at her. "No to selling my house?" She nodded. Jason finally spoke. "Robert always protected you." The words surprised me. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the living room, toward Robert's photograph. "He never let you worry." I sat quietly. "He handled everything." "Because he loved me." Jason nodded. "And maybe I thought I could fix everything before you found out." For the first time, I saw genuine shame in him. Not anger, not entitlement. Shame. "I never wanted to hurt you, Angela." I looked at him. "Then why bring a realtor to my birthday dinner?" He closed his eyes. "Because the bank gave us 30 days. Emily began crying harder. 30 days. Suddenly, the urgency made sense. The pressure, the planning, the desperation. Jason continued. "I thought if we sold the house quickly, everyone would survive." Everyone. The same word again. Everyone except me. "You never asked what I wanted." His voice became very quiet. "No." The clock in the hallway struck 8. Each sound echoed through the house. Robert bought that clock at an estate sale 30 years ago. He said a good clock reminds people that time matters. Perhaps he was right, because time was exactly what had run out for Jason. I finally stood. "Wait here." Neither of them moved. I walked into the living room. Robert's photograph sat beside the fireplace. His smile seemed unchanged, the same calm eyes, the same steady face.
For years after his death, I had often asked him for guidance. Usually, there was only silence. Tonight felt different, because he had already answered, years ago, in legal documents, in letters, in warnings, in love. I returned carrying the copies David had given me. Jason immediately recognized them. "What are those?" "The trust." His face became tense. Emily looked frightened. I sat down. "Your father created this 6 years ago." Emily's eyes filled. "He really thought this would happen?" "No." "Then why?" I looked at her. "Because he understood fear." Jason spoke quietly. "What happens now?" I opened the papers. "The trust states that no sale can happen without my written consent." He nodded. "I understand." "There is more." His eyes moved toward me. "If someone attempts to pressure me into selling the property, certain inheritance rights connected to the house may be revoked." The kitchen became silent. Even though he had already heard it earlier, hearing the actual language felt different. More real. More permanent. Jason slowly sat back. "So Robert truly didn't trust me." I answered honestly. "I think he worried about you." He laughed softly. "Looks like he was right." Emily suddenly spoke. "No." Both of us looked at her. "He wasn't right." She wiped her tears. "He knew people can make terrible choices when they're afraid." Her voice trembled. "And we did." Nobody argued. Because she was right. Jason had not planned this years earlier. Emily had not spent her entire life waiting for my house. Fear had entered their marriage. Debt had entered their lives. And slowly they had convinced themselves that my home was their answer. Jason looked at me. "What do you want me to do?" The question surprised me, because for the first time since my birthday dinner, he was no longer giving directions. He was asking. I thought carefully. Outside, the wind had returned. Leaves moved across the yard. The old house creaked softly. Robert used to say, "Houses listen." Perhaps ours was listening now. "I want the truth." Jason nodded. "All of it." "Yes." He took a long breath. "There are lawsuits." Emily lowered her eyes. "The business owes subcontractors." "There are personal guarantees." "The bank can take our home." My stomach tightened. "How long?" "Maybe weeks." The fear in his voice was real. Not manipulation, not strategy, fear. And for the first time, I felt compassion. Not because of what they had done, because I understood what they were facing. But compassion and surrender are not the same thing. I folded the papers. "The answer is still no." Emily looked up. "What?" "I'm not selling the house." Tears appeared again. "Mom?" "No." Jason looked defeated. "We'll lose everything." I spoke gently. "I am not responsible for your debts." The sentence hurt me. Perhaps it hurt all of us. Because mothers spend their entire lives fixing problems, protecting children, sacrificing, giving. And sometimes we forget that love has boundaries. "I love you," I said. Emily cried. "But I will not give away my home." Jason stared at the table. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then he asked, "What happens now?" I looked at him, and for the first time since all of this began, I knew the answer. Tomorrow.
He frowned. What tomorrow? Tomorrow you come with me. Where? I looked at the trust papers, at Robert's signature, at the future my husband had quietly protected. To David Reynolds' office. The room became still, because tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow there would be no realtor, no birthday cake, no emotional speeches, only documents, truth, and the final confrontation between desperation and the promises Robert Scott had left behind. The next morning felt strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, I woke without fear. The fear had not disappeared because our problems were solved. It disappeared because the truth had finally arrived. Outside, the October sky was clear. Sunlight covered the maple tree, and leaves drifted across the yard that Robert had spent decades maintaining. I stood at the kitchen window holding a cup of coffee. This house had witnessed every chapter of my adult life. My wedding, Emily's childhood, Robert's illness, his death, and now this. I thought about what David had said. Wait. Learn who this belongs to. By now, I knew. Emily belonged to fear. Jason belonged to desperation. But somewhere underneath both of those things still lived the people I loved. At 10 o'clock, Emily arrived. Jason came 5 minutes later. Neither spoke much. The drive to David Reynolds' office felt longer than usual. Nobody turned on the radio. Nobody discussed the weather. We simply sat with our thoughts. When we arrived, David was waiting. He greeted me warmly. He nodded politely to Emily. And when he looked at Jason, his expression remained professional. Nothing more. We entered the conference room, the same room where Robert had signed countless papers over the years. For a moment, I almost expected him to walk through the door. David sat down. Several folders rested on the table. Jason looked nervous. Emily looked exhausted. I felt strangely peaceful. David folded his hands. Thank you for coming. Nobody answered. He looked directly at Jason. Angela told me about your situation. Jason nodded. Yes. I'm sorry. The kindness seemed to surprise him. David continued. But before we discuss solutions, we need clarity. He opened the trust documents. This property belongs to Angela Scott. Jason nodded. I understand. The property is protected by a trust created by Robert Scott. Again, Jason nodded. David continued. The house cannot be sold without Angela's written approval. Silence. The property cannot be borrowed against. Silence. No outside party may force pressure or manipulate a transfer. The house cannot be sold without Angela's written approval. Silence. The property cannot be borrowed against. Silence. No outside party may force pressure or manipulate a transfer. Jason looked down. David's voice remained calm. And certain inheritance protections become void if improper influence occurs. Emily quietly began crying. I didn't know. David looked at her kindly. Your father never wanted you to know. Why? Because he hoped none of this would ever happen. The room became quiet. I watched my daughter. She looked devastated. Not because of money, because she was beginning to understand her father. Perhaps for the first time. Jason finally spoke. Is there any way around this? David looked directly at him. No. The answer landed heavily. No appeals, no options. There are always options. Jason looked hopeful. David continued. Just not Angela's house. Silence again. I saw Jason's shoulders drop. Perhaps for the first time in months, he understood the truth. The house was never available. It had never been his solution, his rescue, his answer. David closed one folder. Then he opened another. Now let's discuss your business. Jason looked confused. My business? Yes. You thought we only represented Angela. David adjusted his glasses. I've practiced law for 42 years. He looked directly at Jason. I know banks. I know debt restructuring. I know bankruptcy. Jason stared at him. What? David nodded. You have options. Emily looked shocked. We do. Yes. Jason leaned forward. The bank wants payment. That isn't the same thing. The room became very quiet. David opened several papers. Your company still has assets. Yes. Equipment. Yes. Accounts. Yes. He looked at Jason. Your situation is serious. Jason lowered his eyes. But it isn't hopeless. Emily began crying again. It's not. David shook his head. No. I suddenly realized something. For months, my daughter and her husband had been living inside panic. And panic narrows vision. Panic convinces people there is only one answer. My house. My home. My future. But perhaps there had always been other answers. They were simply too frightened to see them. Jason finally spoke. I thought we had no choice. David answered gently. Desperate people often believe that. Nobody said anything. After nearly an hour discussing legal options, restructuring possibilities, and negotiations with the bank, something inside the room began to change. The fear slowly weakened. Hope returned. Small, fragile, but real. When the meeting ended, David handed Jason several business cards. A bankruptcy attorney, a financial restructuring specialist, a business mediator. These people can help. Jason accepted them slowly. Why? David smiled. Because Robert would have wanted me to. That sentence broke Emily. She covered her face and cried openly. My dad still saved us. David looked at her kindly. No. She looked up. He saved your mother. The room became silent. And because he saved your mother, he may have saved you too. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood. Robert had not built the trust to punish anyone. He built it to stop panic from destroying the family. And it had worked. Without those documents, perhaps I would have sold the house. Perhaps resentment would have followed. Perhaps regret. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps our family would never recover. But Robert had quietly prevented that, even from the grave. Outside the office, Emily hugged me tightly. I'm sorry. I held her. I know. No, Mom. She cried against my shoulder. I'm truly sorry. I kissed her forehead. So am I. Jason stood several feet away. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small. Not because he was weak, because he was no longer pretending. Eventually, he walked toward me. I owe you an apology. Yes. He looked directly into my eyes. I stopped seeing your house as your home. I nodded, and I started seeing it as money. Yes. Because he was no longer pretending. Eventually, he walked toward me. I owe you an apology. Yes. He looked directly into my eyes. I stopped seeing your house as your home. I nodded, and I started seeing it as money. Yes. Tears appeared in his eyes. I'm ashamed. I thought about Robert, about forgiveness, about mistakes, about fear. Good, I said softly. He looked surprised. Good. Yes. Why? Because shame means you finally understand. The wind moved through the trees. Leaves fell onto the sidewalk. The courthouse bell rang somewhere downtown, and for the first time since my birthday dinner, I felt something I thought I had lost. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. The business still faced problems. The debt still existed. The future remained uncertain, but the truth had finally been spoken. And sometimes, truth heals what money cannot. As we walked toward our cars, Emily stopped beside me. Mom. Yes. What happens now? I looked at the sky, at Robert's favorite season, at the family standing beside me, and I smiled softly. Now we learn how to become a family again. The weeks after our meeting with David Reynolds felt strangely quiet. Not because the problems had disappeared. The bank still called Jason. The construction company still faced lawsuits. Bills still arrived. The future remained uncertain. But something important had changed. The house was no longer part of the conversation. For the first time in months, my home belonged to me again. The first Sunday after our meeting, I sat alone on the back porch with a blanket around my shoulders. October had become colder. The maple tree had lost nearly half its leaves. Robert used to say that trees teach us courage. They let go of what they cannot keep. Perhaps that was exactly what our family was learning. To let go. Emily called every evening. At first, the conversations were awkward, short, careful. Neither of us knew how to speak about what had happened. Eventually, she said, I don't know how to fix this. I answered honestly, neither do I. But healing does not begin with answers. It begins with honesty. A few days later, Noah stopped by after school. He brought groceries. I laughed when he walked through the door carrying 2 heavy bags. You're 17, he smiled, and you're my grandma. He had Robert's smile, the same gentle expression, the same steady eyes. We sat at the kitchen table. He told me about college applications, engineering. He wanted to design bridges. Robert would have loved that. Grandpa always said things should be built to last. I smiled. He did. Noah hesitated. Mom cries a lot. My heart hurt. How is your father? He looked down. Scared? I nodded. Your grandmother knows something about fear. He smiled slightly. Mom says you're stronger than everyone. I looked toward the living room, toward Robert's photograph. No. What your grandfather was. Noah shook his head. No. He looked directly at me. He made sure you would be. Those words stayed with me long after he left. Perhaps strength isn't something we create ourselves. Perhaps sometimes the people who love us build it for us. Robert had done exactly that. Weeks passed. The weather became colder. The leaves disappeared. Thanksgiving approached, and with it came a question I had been avoiding. Family. For 39 years, Thanksgiving had happened in this house. Robert carved the turkey. Emily made the pies. The children watched football. Everyone gathered around this table. But this year felt different. The wounds were still fresh. One afternoon, Emily came alone. She looked exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes had become deeper. She sat across from me in the kitchen. Jason started counseling. I looked surprised. He did. She nodded. He says he doesn't recognize himself anymore. I remained quiet. He says he became obsessed. With money. With survival obsessed. With money. With survival. She wiped her eyes. I did too. I reached for her hand. For the first time since my birthday, she allowed me to hold it. Mom. Yes? Are you angry? I thought carefully. No. Disappointed? She wiped her eyes. I did too. I reached for her hand. For the first time since my birthday, she allowed me to hold it. Mom. Yes. Are you angry? I thought carefully. No. Disappointed? Yes. She nodded. I am too. Outside, the first snowflakes of the year began to fall. Emily looked toward the window. Dad loved snow. He did. She smiled softly. He used to wake me up to build snowmen. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I forgot who he was. I squeezed her hand. No. She looked at me. What, you forgot who you were? The room became quiet. Because that was the real tragedy. Not the debt, not the house, not the realtor. Fear had made my daughter become someone she no longer recognized. Several days later, Jason asked to see me, alone. He arrived carrying a small box. He looked thinner, older, tired. We sat in the living room. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he placed the box on the coffee table. What's this? He opened it. Inside were photographs. Pictures of the house, the ones they had taken. My bedroom, the kitchen, the backyard, the market reports, the brochures, the realtor documents, everything. I wanted to give these back. I looked at him. Why? Because I don't want to see your house that way anymore. His voice trembled. I was wrong. I remained silent. He looked toward Robert's photograph. I think your husband knew me better than I knew myself. Those words surprised me. He saw something. Jason nodded. Pride. I listened. I built my company from nothing. I believed I could fix everything, and when I couldn't, he stopped speaking. When I couldn't, I started looking for someone else's answer. Tears appeared in his eyes. Your house. The room remained silent, because finally, after all these months, he understood. Not the trust, not the legal documents, not the inheritance. The lesson. He looked at me. I don't expect forgiveness. I answered honestly. Good. He seemed surprised. Why? Because forgiveness isn't something you ask for. He lowered his eyes. It has to be earned. He nodded. Yes. Before leaving, he stopped beside Robert's photograph. For several seconds, he looked at it. Then, he quietly said, I failed your daughter. And he walked out. Thanksgiving arrived 3 weeks later. For the first time in 40 years, I almost canceled. The memories felt too heavy. The wounds too recent. But on Thanksgiving morning, Noah called. Grandma. Yes. Are we still coming? I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen. The same house. The same table. And I heard Robert's voice. This house protects family. It does not divide it. Yes, I said. We're still coming. That afternoon, the family arrived. Emily, Jason, Noah, Lily. The atmosphere felt different, quieter, gentler. Nobody discussed money, Nobody discussed property. Nobody mentioned the trust. Instead, we talked about school, snow, football, old memories. Halfway through dinner, Noah stood. He raised his glass. "I want to say something." Everyone looked at him. He looked toward me, then toward Robert's empty chair. "Grandpa built this house." He swallowed, but Grandma protected it. Tears filled my eyes. He continued, and because she protected it, maybe she protected all of us. Nobody spoke. Even Jason looked down, because the boy had spoken the truth. The house had never been the inheritance. The lesson was the boundary, the dignity, the courage. And as snow began falling outside, I realized something. Our family was still broken. Healing would take time. Trust would take time. Forgiveness would take time. But we were finally walking in the right direction. And sometimes that is enough.